All right. Should we get into it?
Yeah.
We're on. Mr. Trump, great to have you on the podcast. I know you've travelled a little way to be with us. What do we call you, first of all?
Aussie.
All right. Not Ben, not Mr. Trump.
No, Aussie.
Aussie. Very good. All right. Aussie.
Aussie short for Austin, Austin.
Yeah.
I wondered about that. Why did you go with Austin rather than just Aussie? Is that a...
Well, I knew that the Electoral Commission would allow suitable derivatives of a name.
Yeah.
And they have approved Aussie, or Trump, capital letters, comma, Aussie.
Did they give you any grief over it? Any kind of I's to dot or?
Well, I had to show that I got my nominations for the independent candidacy in the name of Dawkins, and then show that I had to have to subsequently change my name. So I wanted to see the change of name birth certificate.
So for those who haven't seen the news everywhere over the past week or two, you are formerly the MP formerly known as Ben Dawkins MLC. Now, of course, Austin Let's Trump MLC for another 3 weeks at least. You're running again. Is the name change just an election gimmick? What's behind it?
Well, I thought about that, and it's really a protest. That's what I'm saying. It's a protest. So people have protest votes, and people stand on the street smeared in red paint if they're launching a protest about animal rights or something like that.
Indeed, yeah.
However, my protest is about what the Labor government has done with its majority in the 2 houses of Parliament in Western Australia, and without going through too much, it's all in my press release. But one thing they did was this is the first election in Western Australia where independents running in the upper house had to get 250 signatures, nominations. So I've just been through that process. In fact, we formed a group which is 1,250 signatures,
right?
And we paid $10,000, $2,000 each for 5 people. This is all just to get a box above the line and be able to compete on some sort of a footing with the parties.
Yeah.
So the parties, mainly Labor, have tried to relegate independents to below the line in the upper house in Western Australia. So this is just one of the things that they've done to effectively try to eradicate their opposition. So it's worked. I mean, we've got a box above the line as a group of 5 independents. However, there was 49 independents who ran in the various regions for the upper house last time, and that's down to 10 because there is an additional 5 that have their own little boxes below the line. Right. So it sounds all fairly technical, but they've reduced the number of independents from 49 down to 10.
Right.
And I mean, so they've eradicated. You'll see in the federal parliament there's discussion at the moment about what the federal government is doing to try and eradicate independents and minor parties to an extent, and this is all something that affects our democracy very much.
Yeah.
So last election in Western Australia, you needed $250. This time you needed $2,000 to register as an independent, plus 250 signatures, which didn't exist last time.
And how hard were they to get? Were 250 signatures easy to find? Do enough voters want Aussie Trump above the line or below the line?
Well, that was
on the
Ben
ballot?
Dawkins at the time.
Yeah.
I would.
Is it a bit of a process to kind of you're out in the street with a sandwich board? How's it go trying to round up the numbers?
We took it online.
Yeah.
And we liaised with the WA Electoral Commission to get the technicalities of what they were looking for, and we ultimately used online signatures.
Yeah.
And Adobe Sign. To get digital signatures and digital receipts from people.
Yeah.
Because doing it in paper form would have been too onerous.
Yeah.
But it was very hard to get all the other people registered. So we registered. The ticket is Sophia Mamond, Louise Kingston, and Aussie Trump. We're all sitting MPs, independents.
Yeah.
And in that order. And then we have a local guy from Bunbury, Adrian Perot, or Perrott, and Tony Ball or Anthony Ball from Kalgoorlie.
Right. So you're all working with dual naming options, evidently, for one thing.
Well, Well, no. I mean, it's only really Anthony down to Tony. That's allowable.
Not quite as big a shift.
No. But for those guys to get their signatures, I know Anthony was walking around in 46-degree heat in Kalgoorlie. Well done, Anthony. But this was it was a onerous process, and it just didn't exist last time. So it's quite historic that we've done it. And it was only $250 last time, and no signatures. And it's 2,250 signatures, or 1,250 signatures for a group of 5.
Yeah.
But what is it about Trump that makes him an appropriate vessel for this protest? What's the connection between Trump and these electoral changes?
The electoral changes, not so much. I mean, there's another 3 lots of electoral changes that I'm protesting against with the name change. But what I just spoke about with the relegation of independents and the decimation of independents from 49 down to 10. But there's things like which I touched on, the abolishment of the regions. So we used to have regional representation in the upper house up until this time, and that's how I got in. I'm still presently for another, as you say, another short while, the member for the Southwest in the upper house. But that's all changing. It's one statewide electorate, and so the people of Kalgoorlie, Bunbury, Esperance, Port Hedland, etc., don't have any specific regional representation, and that also favours Labor because Labor is a city-based party. So they will campaign in the city, and there's no incentive to campaign, out in the bush because there's much fewer votes. So it used to create a system where we would get specific regional representation, and that's been torn away. But to your point, the Trump specifically, I could have changed my name to Neil Diamond or something, I suppose. But the Trump thing is very relevant because of if you look at the executive orders that Trump's made, they're things that I've almost exactly mirror things that I've said in Parliament. I'm not suggesting Donald is following Aussie, but it almost looks like that in some ways because I used you only get as an independent a certain number of, or even in a minor party, a certain number of motions per year. I used my first motion to call upon the government to acknowledge the harms caused to people with the vaccine mandates and so on. And as you know, only recently 13 police officers sacked 4 years after COVID and 2 years after the mandates were lifted. So people are still smarting from what happened under that sort of oppressive McGowan-Cook regime, and the people that care about it, the people that don't. But I used my first motion to sort of call the government to account and acknowledge the harms that were done to those people who really just wanted to have a say, we call it bodily autonomy, about what goes into their body, and that right was effectively ripped away from them. So just on that very particular point, obviously I haven't been successful in getting the 13 police officers who were sacked in just September just gone, reinstated, but Donald is reinstating military with full back pay. The military personnel who were terminated for not taking the vaccine, he's reinstating them with full back pay. That was one of his executive orders. So I can go through some others, but there's a correlation there with Donald.
Who wore the red tie first? Are you pulling inspiration from him, or is
definitely Donald?
Yeah.
I have thought about. You use the word gimmicks. There's gimmicks that I can do. I have said drill, baby, drill.
You have. I saw that on the release.
But I'm sort of steering away from the gimmicks, if you like.
Sure.
Aside from the red tie.
Yeah, the red tie and the name. I mean, they're probably kind of two of the more iconic markers
and
of a certain style of politics.
Last time I saw you, I don't think you had your hair that colour either. That could be new as well.
No, that was for Warnie. I had a charity cricket match. I gave $5,000 from my electorate allowance to a charity in Bunbury called Shining Hope, which deals with suicide prevention. And we had a bit of a charity cricket match, and I was Warnie. That was where the hair came from.
Right.
Yeah.
There's actually an interesting someone should explore the kind of parallels between those two characters, actually. There's
Shane wore more so Donald Trump could run, maybe. But I mean, you've changed your name, you've changed your style, you've changed your clothes. Do you think this is what voters want? the red tie, the Trump name, the Trump brand. Do you think enough voters in regional WA are kind of are connecting, are drawn to that? Is it speaking?
Yeah,
to people?
well, it's regional, but it's statewide. I mean, there's definitely. I mean, I've made speeches. It wasn't totally out of the blue. I mean, I did make speeches in Parliament just before Parliament rose in November about how I think a Donald Trump presidency can be good for Western Australia.
Yeah.
And it's a phenomena out there that where he has, in a short space of time, he calls stuff out. So, I mean, I don't know, I'm down in Fremantle, so I'll probably get lynched down here. But and I am a Fremantle person, actually, for the last 20 years before I got divorced. But, yeah, I mean, there's woke lefty stuff, and here we are in Freo, but there's woke lefty stuff that is really become absurd and just intolerable out in the community. And I'm talking and Trump speaks to the average Joe when he does things like that. And one of his executive orders was that there are only two. Well, he said genders. I think if you read the document, he said sexes. There's only two sexes. And this is some of the absurd stuff that's come through in Western Australia in my time. And I used other than the COVID motion, I used my other motion to say that biological sex is a fact and a man can't become a woman even after surgery because of the chromosomes.
Because Labor have been fairly progressive in WA. One of the few areas some people might say they have been around gender and gender affirming care and so on, is my understanding. So is that part of the schism or the difference in values you found between yourself and the party? Because they've been sort of fairly congratulated or lauded for some of their positions that they've taken in these kind of areas.
Well, it's already coming undone. I mean, even I predicted it in Parliament in November. I said Donald Trump had come out against gender affirming care. Now he's come out with an executive order saying there's only two sexes, and that's going to be replicated in the government written documentation in America. It's already now, we've got a federal government health review in Australia of gender affirming care. It's common sense, really, that we need to make sure that we're not creating an environment that misleads children. And and the Donald Trump common sense is something that I'm interested in. And the calling out of the woke leftist nonsense. Now, I mean, again, it's a bit like the vaccines. You blokes might not care, and people out there might not care.
Oh, look, there's a health food shop 2 doors down from here that was very worked up about the vaccine mandate a couple of years ago, I can tell you.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm moving on to sex now. I mean, biological sex, but when you work as a parliamentarian and you have people, mothers come into your office and they say, what is the government doing? I lost my daughter 4 years ago to what this lady in this instance called a trans cult, and her daughter had a hysterectomy and both breasts removed by the age of 21, and is not a happy person from there, and the mother hasn't seen her since then.
Is that not a form of, I mean, is that not to get too deep in the sort of in the weeds on these issues, but is that not a form of bodily autonomy? Isn't there a kind of an argument that that's just that self-expression and freedom manifesting itself? If you're standing up for freedom and fighting for that, isn't that kind of potentially just a young person finding their way in the world and figuring out what they want and pursuing it?
No, it's okay. I mean, in an adult world, it's okay. But in a child environment, and this legislation that's been passed in WA allows children from the age of 12 to change their birth certificate from male to female by just going to the GP. So
change their name, perhaps.
Yeah, well, there you go. There's another analogy, but it's something that is, for a young person, the government should not be lying to young people to say that they can be the other sex. They can't be. And what that creates then is, and doctors, there's documentaries on this, but it creates a pathway where children think, well, if I can change my name on my sex on my birth certificate, the next pathway, and this happens not so much before 18, but shortly after they turn 18, the next pathway is, well, maybe I'll start having bottom and top surgery.
Yeah.
And it's it's devastating for families, and no one cares until it's your daughter or niece or nephew. And I have a friend whose niece and nephew have both been through this in the one family, and it's the responsibility of the government not to lie, and simply saying that you can, as we do have in Western Australia now with this self-ID legislation that's come through, is that you can simply go to the GP and 15 minutes later you can walk out, or take your, get a new birth certificate with female on it, and that's a fundamental lie, and it's not for the government to lie about biology and mislead children down a pathway that's very damaging.
Having said which, again, not to labour the point, but you're clearly not someone who's averse to shifting identities, to discarding one name, one identity, and picking up another off the rack. This
is a protest. Just for those at home, I know that I'm not Donald Trump.
But you look like him, though.
You do. It's remarkable. It's a remarkable resemblance.
But there's children out there who think they're actually female when they're male, and that's the difference. It's about government lying to kids and misleading them, and that's what I've spoken about in Parliament. And thank God, Donald Trump is jumping on that now.
It seems like you've done a lot more soul searching and thinking about it than he has. I'm not sure I've heard him speak about it for 5 or 10 minutes on end at any point, certainly not in the inauguration address, I don't think. Are there any other qualities that you see yourself sharing with the president?
Donald has also, just called out government inefficiency and obviously corruption of various forms. Mm. And he's also, with his executive orders, for example, he's got executive orders on immigration. I was thinking of building a wall, just...
Where? who are we keeping in? Who gets to stay and who gets to stay? That's sounding almost McGowan-like, building walls between the... Yeah. I remember when I couldn't get down south for a couple of weeks.
I was thinking of building a wall, probably just this side of Kwinana.
Okay.
Just to keep the people from Kwinana, which is obviously Roger Cook and Rockingham out. Yeah. Because I don't know if I've got the power, but if we could declare an emergency on our southern border, with Kwinana, I'm talking about.
And where you're sort of identifying yourself here with the people of Freo, presumably with the People's Republic of Fremantle, and a bit of a fortified barricade between us and the heathens to the south.
I've got friends down in Kwinana and Rockingham, and good people, but I thought if you were going to,
there could be a sort of a visa system, a freedom of passage, I suppose, between the two.
Well, with the how those areas have been strongholds for Labor. And given what I've experienced with the nonsense of Labor in this Parliament, I thought maybe that would be a place for a wall, if we wanted to declare an emergency on our southern border. But there's one for you to take home. But no, in terms of immigration, what I was going to say was I also used a motion to talk about reducing immigration as one of the ways in which we might be able to relieve the housing crisis in some way. And it's simple math. I think in Australia we can build 190,000 homes a year, but we let up to 800,000 people in 1 year. That was a couple of years ago.
Seems like a lot. That's a pretty fast rate of 800,000.
Yeah, that's
Right, and that's just not just kind of holiday visas and that kind of thing as well.
No, it was net, I believe. I could be wrong about that.
Isn't it the case?
I think the last year was 500 and something, but I think there was a year before that was 800,000. But nevertheless, it was a lot more than the homes we could build. But so the point I was making was that we were basically. Well, I used a motion to talk about reducing immigration as part of potentially solving the housing or relieving the housing crisis.
Isn't the counter argument to that though that we need builders? Those builders are going to come from somewhere.
We need doctors.
Hence immigration.
We need people to build a bloody wall if we're going to get that done. I mean, you should see
it all sounds labour intensive.
It's a little bit rusty. I'd prefer to be behind a microphone, I reckon, than with a trowel.
I'm not passionate about the wall.
Yeah, all right.
That was more of
another gimmick. I mean, people in Freo tend to reckon there's a wall between them and the northern suburbs. Forget about the southern suburbs. Half the people here don't cross the river to get up to the city. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe we need a bubble like the dome in Las Vegas in Nevada. Maybe that'd get the job done here.
How's your golf game?
Not at the moment. I have played a bit of golf in the past. Point Wild was always good.
Well, what about the Bunbury? What about the Bunbury golf course down at Eton? I was down there a few weeks back for the launch of another independence campaign, the Sue Chapman campaign for the federal seat of Forest. You had much to do with the Teals.
No, but I suppose you have in Fremantle. I do know.
Well, we had one sitting here, right in the seat you're in now. Actually, the seat's changed, but she was sitting there nonetheless. I think she was sitting here actually.
I know Kate Hewlett, I think it is.
That's Kate.
I've met her a few times.
Yeah.
When I was sort of wandering around Freo aimlessly at various points in my life, going into her shops and things like that.
Yeah.
But just to finish on the immigration, that was another thing where Trump was has been able to call it out, and when I called it out in the West Australian Parliament, I was just after the camera turned off. The Honourable Pierre Yang from the Labor Party yelled out "racist,"
right?
Even though I was talking about housing. So this is the sort of one of the reasons I'm protesting is that the way that Labor sort of treats with any criticism is that they turn it back on you and call you names and try and demonise you. Funnily enough, within 2 weeks, the Liberal Party had their meeting and Dutton came out against it. So in favour of reducing immigration.
Yeah.
And I heard the Liberals in the corridor saying, "Oh, we can talk about that now."
Right.
But they also polled onto me when I mentioned it. So this is the problem with the major parties. They're not allowed to talk about things until they've actually had their party meeting. And similarly that was the case with immigration. Even Albo's come and said he wants to reduce the foreign student numbers. And so it's almost like I led that issue in a sense because I was the only one who was allowed to talk about it or who talked about it in the Parliament and was criticised for it. And then within a few weeks, the major parties are talking about it. So, I mean, the fact that Donald's come out strongly, obviously, on that as well, there's a bit of a link there.
So ahead of the curve, you reckon, on some issues at least?
Ahead of the curve in the sense because I'm not constrained by the major party philosophy.
Yeah.
They're very worried, as you've seen with a lot of things, they're very worried about their marketing, and so they don't like to even, sometimes they bury the truth because the truth might be controversial.
But there's been a definite shift here for you because you were pre-selected for one of the major parties. You talked before about the Cook-McGowan regime in terms of COVID. You were a party member at that time. You were pre-selected at that time. So what shifted there for you? Because I guess a lot of these positions seem fairly counter to the positions of the party that you were once a member of.
Yeah, so the Labor Party was I think very good for a long time. I mean, I can't think of too many things that really worried me before COVID with Labor.
Right.
I mean, I had a personal falling out with Labor at that time and a legal falling out with Labor. I also took them to the Supreme Court in 2021. But yeah, nevertheless, or was it 2020 might have been. So yeah, there was a few things happening concurrently, my separation and stuff like that. But I feel as though Labor deserted me. I mean, you've got to understand they've gone so much further to the left, and again, I'm here in Freo, so I'm risking my own life. But the United Workers Union, Carolyn Smith, if you go to the state Labor conference, Rainbow Labor, they've controlled Labor now. The good old Catholics, Jesse, isn't it?
Jared.
Yeah, the good old Catholics. I mean, they used to.
I went to a Catholic school too.
My kids go to Catholic school in Fremantle, actually.
Yeah.
But the
very avant-garde,
or one of them does. But the Catholics used to keep the Labor Party on track.
But I mean, Labor's been in the Pride Parade for a fair bit longer than since COVID, right? I think that's a fairly long term. Labor have been attached or associated with those kind of issues for quite some time.
They're a progressive party.
Yeah.
At least on paper, right? I mean, that's how they sell themselves to a lot of people.
So I actually don't like to talk that much, but you guys are making me talk. So
that's the whole idea.
What happened is that the right the left gained control in Western Australia and federally. That's why we've got the sort of leaders that we've got.
But can you call, say, Mark McGowan a figure of the left? I mean,
no, but he was appointed by the left and supported by the left. But if you look at state conference and so on, the influence of the right has just fallen down. And the right used to be the common sense, family value type people with with a lot of Catholics, and that was the history of the Labor Party. And you can talk to people out there, union members and so on, who just cannot understand where the Labor Party has got to with the left being the dominant force in the Labor Party state and federal these days. And it sort of happened. There was a confluence of events. There was COVID, and then there was a voice, which as a lawyer I had a real problem with, like unbalancing the parliament in that way, with enshrining one lobby group with an influence on the parliament. I thought that was just the most ridiculous, extreme notion that you could even come up with.
There was no voice to state parliament proposed immediately, was it?
But you were asking me about what I used to be, and I'm saying that there was around about that COVID time and subsequent to COVID, Labor has completely lost its mind, and a lot of it's to do with having majorities, and especially a big majority in Western Australia, which has gone to their head.
And I mean, the figurehead at the time was, of course, Mark McGowan. He was notoriously a pretty, supreme leader. How much did Mark McGowan himself have to do with this shift, do you reckon? You've spoken about it being during COVID, and obviously COVID was when he really kind of rose to ascendance in the state.
Yeah. I mean, these issues are intertwined. I mean, McGowan was always competent. When I was in the Labor Party for 30 years, he was one of the more competent people, and he's unaligned. But like I say, he's got his power from the left. I mean, his treatment of COVID wasn't really anything to do with left or right. Well, although you could say it's more, a bit of a socialist authoritarian model with how he treated people. So you could say there's a correlation there. But, COVID was a bit different. It just seemed to be him looking for politicising COVID and wanting to be seen as a strong man, which, as you know, strong men like Donald Trump.
So you think McGowan maybe saw a few commonalities, identified a bit with Donald as well?
No. I think
he was drawing some inspiration,
but he was more.
It certainly didn't sound that way.
He was more with the wanting to be seen as a strong leader.
Yeah.
And I spoke about it in my inaugural speech. He just kept going further and further with his so-called management of COVID, and that was one of the things. And if you probably, not that I expect people to read or listen to what I do, but at my inaugural speech in June of 2023, I talked for an hour and 10 minutes, and I spoke about all these things and how the aggregation of all these things that came around about the time when I was leaving the Labor Party made it clear to me that the Labor Party had lost its mind, and I was actually fortunate to be out of the Labor Party. So I don't feel I've changed. I feel that the Labor Party, but look, the sort of person I am, I could never have been a Labor Party backbencher anyway. I think you've seen how they vote in a block, and that would not have suited me as a lawyer, as a democratically minded person, as a critical thinker. The job of a Labor Party backbencher is not to be a critical thinker. You can see what happens every time they vote against the party or cross the floor or what have you, or even intimate that they may cross the floor. They get thrown out. So I wouldn't have been happy I wouldn't have lasted as a Labor Party backbencher anyway.
You've said extensively that this shift is a protest, and you said in part it's a protest against Labor corruption. Can you that's quite a strong word, corruption. Are there specific things you've seen that have led you to come to this place where you've left the Labor Party and you've severed ties, so to speak? You're wearing a red tie, not a Labor red tie, a Trump red tie.
Is it?
Well, you tell me.
Red.
There you go.
People aren't that interested unless they're affected directly. But when I was a lawyer, I worked with Leanne at the Jandakot Residents and Ratepayers Association, and I spoke about this in Parliament. So $55,000 is what it costs you to buy influence in this state. In New South Wales, donations from property developers are illegal.
Right.
But the Glen Iris golf course is now houses. The people who bought on that golf course thought they were promised a golf course in their back door. East Court Property Proprietary Limited gave 2 lots of 27,500 to the Labor Party. It's disclosed on the internet, and almost immediately Rita Salviotti, as planning minister at the time, approved the development of that golf course into houses, contrary to 10,000 signatures of residents to the upper house in Western Australia, and contrary to a 9-1 vote against that development by the city of Coburn.
What year was this?
This is basically 2023.
Right.
So there was Coburn Council voted 9-1 against this development. The only thing that seemed to weigh in favour of this development being approved was $55,000 from the Labor Party, from the East Court Property Proprietary Limited to the Labor Party. It's disclosed on the internet, but this is an issue for, we've got a party called the Sustainable Australia Anti-Corruption Party that's coming in this state election, and they've actually drawn first on the ballot paper. But if you speak to people like this, the perception of corruption verging on apparent corruption, let's say, to choose the words. I mean, that line is getting harder to find, isn't it? I mean, you've got sort of smoking guns coming up all over the place now in terms of donations to political parties and what actually happens to residents and mums and dads as a result of that. It's certainly not the mums and dads that are getting looked after, let's say that. And I mean, Mark McGowan had $6,000 a head fundraisers at the home of Nigel Satterley. So, I mean, I'll leave it to people at home to draw the dots, but corruption comes in many forms, including not being willing to do your job properly and so on, because it can favour other people, and that's why I say, and I've spoken in Parliament about this government being the most corrupt government that we've had in the history of the state of Western Australia. That was when I was supposed to be giving Christmas cheer in November. Did you see that?
I didn't see it. I mean, I know that Templeman normally does a song. You were slightly darker.
I was told I had to do Christmas cheer.
Right.
But I prepared a speech about this being the most corrupt government we've had in the history of the state of Western Australia.
How did that go down?
Not very well.
Right.
But I'm not interested, as I said in that speech. It's on the internet, on Facebook and whatnot. But it was not, I wasn't there for a kumbaya loving.
No.
I'd prepared my speech. So
get any RSVPs to your Christmas drinks this year?
No, but you guys probably should see if you can get invited next year if you really do have media credentials. Or you
we can get them. We can get them.
We find a way, yeah.
Because Hamish Hastie gave a speech at the end of year.
I gave him a really hard time about not inviting me. I actually organised a little protest out the front because there was no invite for me. I was messaging Hamish telling him.
So this is Hamish Hastie of WA Today.
Absolutely hilarious. So this was the Christmas press gallery.
I can't believe I missed it.
Christmas drinks in November. He was hilarious. He was. He swore that none of us could. Well, I think he called it Chatham House rules. So we can't say anything about it.
That applied.
Nevertheless, he was.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
Hamish has got his own election podcast. Maybe we need to do a collab crossover and get him to spill the beans.
yeah. Well, no, you should get him to say something about that. It was very funny, but I don't suppose he can.
Who knows? Going back to McGowan, he left politics not long after you did. Do you reckon there's...
What do you mean after I did? After I came in?
After you left the Labor Party, I should say. After you were asked to leave the Labor Party. Can you tell us a bit about the circumstances surrounding that? Has that had much to do with kind of how the path you've chosen since?
Just up the road from here, I lived for 20 years in a basically happy marriage, but the misso was keen on getting in the house and I was living in the house. She'd moved out to her sisters, but never, long story short, she managed to say whatever she needed to say to the magistrate, and I ended up with a restraining order, so I had to leave the house and she moved back in, which is weird, but anyway. Then I sent the emails, sort of arguing. I was working as a lawyer down in Narrogin. I sent emails. Essentially, I was instructed to email her about the kids and the property, but I wasn't allowed to argue, but I ended up arguing. and that's where the breach comes in. So there was no physical contact, obviously, but I was breached on these emails, which were outside of the allowable content. They might have started with the kids and the house, but me getting emotional and not seeing my kids and so on, and getting more and more frustrated. So again, this is not something that, you know, feminists, I don't know if you guys are feminists, but the feminists in Fremantle don't necessarily want to hear this, but there's a huge community of men out there who've been on the, had the raw end of the prawn through the family court process. But nevertheless, I'll move on from that. So with those breaches, I sent the emails, in fact, to Mark McGowan and said, could you talk to me about this and what have you? And he didn't respond at all. But through the press, he just said that I was a bad man and threw me out. He wasn't willing to pick up the phone and talk man to man. He just crucified me through the media.
I mean, speaking of the media, there's obviously been a huge amount of focus on family and domestic violence in recent years. Like, do you accept that there's a crisis when it comes to domestic violence, in particular against women, perpetrated by men? Because there've been a lot of women who, you know, have lost their life because of that. Is it something that you're concerned about?
Yeah, it's terrible. There's 10 times more women than men that are killed in domestic violence incidents, but it's 10 times. There still is one man for every 10 or 9 or 10 women that are killed. The problem, it is a crisis, and those women should not, obviously, should be here today. But the problem with, and this is, if we get back to Trumpism, that's what I'm here for, is to call out the nonsense, woke crap, and our Prime Minister is probably one of the worst. If you look at Domestic Violence Month last year in May, he spent the entire month demonising men and telling men that they all had to pick up their responsibilities, but without mentioning at even once that, you know, it can happen the other way. When you get into this woke sort of virtue signalling world that Albo lives in, they just see that the more they can beat up on men, the better it is, without acknowledging that there is another side to things as well.
I mean, the American Trump, of course, has famously and repeatedly and extensively been accused by women of assault, of sexual assault, of physical assault in some cases, of abuse of various forms. I mean, how do you feel kind of tying yourself to that side of Trumpism, I suppose? Is that one of the other similarities that you're comfortable to kind of to wear alongside? I mean, he's a guy who's been accused.
What are you saying similarities here?
Well, I'm just saying he's outrageous. I'm just saying there's a guy who's been convicted in a civil court of sexual abuse, and you've taken his name effectively. So
I to be honest, I mean the Stormy Daniels thing, is this it? Or no, the other one?
There was the writer E. Jean Carroll who.
Well, okay, so if you want to go there, so I mean I've been accused and in fact found guilty of sending emails calling my ex-wife, or she was my wife at the time, names about because I wasn't seeing my son. I don't want to get emotional about it.
No.
But I hopefully see him after this interview.
Yep.
But but I was never accused of anything physical, sexual. I'm not trying to adopt Donald's Donald's sexual and sexual history or whatever by taking the name change.
But you don't think it's important enough to argue against that form of politics? I mean, we've spoken earlier about gender issues, but there's another side to the gender issue, which is that he and many of his supporters have been accused of being misogynist, of promoting, violence in various forms, some of which is targeting women and making them feel unsafe. How do you feel about that characterisation of Trumpism?
Yeah, well, that's not acceptable. I mean, that's not acceptable. But I maybe incorrectly, but I haven't sort of read much about it, that stuff. I mean, I'm looking at the fact that he has spoken to the people on these issues that I've spoken about today, reinstating military officers with full back pay who chose not to take the vaccine. I think the man has a great propensity to cut through the nonsense that the left has sort of got away with the last few years, and that transports very effectively to Western Australia. Yeah, I'm not condoning any of his other stuff. Haven't really read much about it.
And just to finish up with McGowan, and then we'll move on to what's next for your political career. He followed you out the door from, well, if not from the Labor Party, then he left Parliament not long after kicking you out of the Labor Party. Do you have kind of any thoughts about McGowan's legacy and the reasons that he left? He said he was exhausted. Was that your impression of the man?
He was apparently exhausted, but he's taken up all these jobs, right? So, I mean, if you bring it back to my time in Parliament, and I'm fairly technically minded, so I just refer back to what I have done, and that's, speaking in Parliament on various bills, and we certainly with these electoral reforms, and I was actually on a unity ticket with Brad Pettit. Hello, Brad. We'll see you on the Sunday dinner. So basically with Brad, we spoke about the importance of really having what we would call a cooling off period or something, a period, ideally a couple of years between when you leave government, like McGowan, and when you start working for mining companies. I mean, we predicted that this would happen. I predicted it in my inaugural speech back in 2023, but he's got jobs with multiple mining companies who arguably he's made favourable decisions for during his term as Premier and Treasurer. And the same thing happened with Ben Wyatt.
Yep.
Now, this is where people don't like the word corruption or whatever, but the soft and hard corruption, I mean, that's certainly soft corruption. When we don't know what conversations, whether there was any of these jobs were made contingent on other decisions that he made, but there's certainly a perception there, and people can draw the dots at home. People aren't happy about it, and so if you want to use the word corruption in its broad sense, there's another one. And we've tried, obviously, in the Labor, in the WA Parliament, and that's why I'm saying that Brad Pettit was also onto this issue. We've spoken about, and I think I'm pretty sure Brad even moved an amendment that I supported to one of the electoral bills, and that was to introduce like a cooling off period so that people like McGowan have to spend 2 years or at least a year or, God help us, 6 months, 6 weeks, but some period of time before they take up jobs with companies that they potentially may have assisted during their term as Premier, because people lose faith in the government and they see the rich getting richer and people like McGowan lining his pockets. So I don't have much good to say about McGowan, and he wasn't a real man. He didn't pick up the phone and talk to me, and he just threw me under the bus. And his personal actions with the way he's treated my constituents during COVID, and people still come into my office about that, haven't got themselves back on the ground, on their feet financially from having lost their jobs during COVID, and the way that he's taken up these jobs and is just more reason to think that the man is ethically challenged.
We kind of often talk here, including with Brad Pettit, about the influence of the resources industry in Western Australia and the power that has. And, you're talking about corruption in similar terms. The American Trump, he's kind of quite close with figures like Gina Reinhart, powerful figures in the resources industry. Would you, as the Aussie Trump, have the same kind of close relationships with mining billionaires and heavy hitters in that industry?
No, but I'm not interested in I'm not sort of a person that is seeking financial gain and sort of financial associations like that. I'm lucky to have be comfortable enough myself. So I wouldn't be hunting down jobs in mining companies like McGowan is. But but also the point is that where we do need to support mining and drilling for gas, for example, in this state, is because, I mean, and I'm totally opposite to Brad Pettit in this sense, is that down in Freo here, and I know I'm making a target for myself again, but
we're a non-violent people. We've got very firm precepts about that.
But essentially,
You're safe here.
Essentially, the way the energy debate works in this state is that you blokes down in Freo here, you basically indulge in your own sort of climate ideology, and the result of that is that the people in the burbs and the bush get sent the bill for higher energy prices because you guys are all jumping on this climate ideology.
But all the gas gets shipped offshore anyway. Almost all of it's going overseas.
That's a separate point. But what I'm talking about is...
Well, it's directly
It
driving
might
up
have
our power
more to
prices.
do with the prices, yeah.
Well, no, but we've got a reserve for use here.
Yeah, but they don't
Which
need
is
it.
being undermined every day. The reserve has been the domestic gas reserve. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So that was 100% of onshore gas, and Roger Cook has just given away 20% of that, and it looks like there'll be more given away in the future.
Yeah, well, that's
the
not good.
prices have gone up since then. So if we're talking about energy prices,
No, well,
I think
I was on a roll there, and you. But basically, with the renewables and with the shutting down of the coal-fired power stations in 2029, and the move, this transition that you blokes in Fremantle are making us do,
Not personally.
is one way or another is leading to higher energy prices for mums and dads out in the burbs and the bush, and these are the people who, to some degree or another, don't even believe in the climate ideology that Fremantle people do. So it's all right for you guys because you're living down here, you've got your house you've got down here, and for people like Brad, but they're effectively sending the bill for this climate ideology to the people out in the burbs who can't afford it and who don't necessarily believe in this climate ideology anyway.
but if you just look at
So I think that's where I got my drill baby drill from,
yeah.
because we need to actually get back to using the immense resources that we have in Western Australia for the benefit of the people and in bringing down those energy prices. That's what I'm saying.
But I mean, the problem is if they drill baby drill here, we're not using it here. We're sending it to Japan. We're sending it elsewhere.
Well, I agree with you. That needs to be fixed as well.
I mean, the other thing is though that if you look at the numbers, just the raw numbers, renewables are cheaper than gas and
Yeah, I'm
coal
not gonna
and
get
less
on-
subsidised.
I'm not going to get into that debate because it's like they're cheaper, but they're themselves owned by, in many, the proponents are like Danish billionaires.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Like the
That's
ones
true.
in
And they're dropping like flies, seemingly, down your
Yeah.
way. They're all pulling out, aren't they, anyway?
Yeah, thank God. Geograph Bay is sacred to us in the southwest, so it's a sacred site. We don't have any industry on our sacred sites, but that's our policy in the southwest.
Unlike other parts of the states, would you be willing to export the same blanket ban on building industry on sacred sites across WA? Because you might run into a bit of an issue with that drill baby drill policy.
We've got the Aboriginal cultural heritage.
Well, it's about 50 years old, though.
No, well, it's
What-
same
what-
principle.
what-
Anyway, you're getting off track.
What did you think of that? When Roger Cook came in, replaced McGowan, you were obviously just starting your term. What was your position on the new cultural heritage legislation? What did you think about the decision Cook made almost immediately to pull it down?
Well, I spoke about it at the time. It was a good move by him. It was a sign that he was a more reasonable man than McGowan. Basically, I mean, it was outrageous. I mean, the people of Western Australia, and this is a Trump analogy, if you like, need to have the benefit of their property rights, of the resources that we have under the ground, liquid gold in Trump's case, he calls it. But and this is consistent with this is why I say drill baby drill. Hopefully to bring down energy prices, but and rather than this sort of woke ideology of we have to pay more for energy because because we have to transition, and it's an obsession with that. But in regard to the Aboriginal cultural heritage, it's the same sort of principle that I'm working on here. Is the people and the farmers need to have the benefit of their property without intolerable burdens being placed upon them. what that was actually a case of the government not knowing where the significant sites were, and they were outsourcing that to the farmer to go and find where the significant sites were then they would have to contract with a local elder or what have you to come out and survey the property. I mean, that's just outrageous. I mean, if the government hasn't figured out where the significant sites are by now, then we're in a bit of trouble. And why should the bill for that be sent to the average farmer or landowner?
Speaking of average farmers and landowners and intolerable burdens, what about fracking up north? Does the same rule apply up there? Lock the gate, keep them out, keep the government out of, keep industry and government off private land? Where's your?
I don't know.
You would have seen walking to the studio this morning. There's a lot of signs around South Freo saying, "I'm going to vote for an MP who wants a statewide ban on fracking."
I actually don't know much about fracking.
Okay.
I haven't really followed that debate.
Yeah.
So you're saying?
I'm saying there's lots of farmers up north in the Kimberley apparently who don't want big Texan oil and gas companies coming in to do coal seam gas extraction on their farmland.
Okay, from the farmer's perspective, I have a bit of experience in that kind of thing. So exploration and so on privately owned property. Like you jump, Jesse, right? You jump around too much, mate. I mean, what you've got is you've got fundamental rights, and then you've got reasonable incursions on those things.
Yeah.
The Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act in its previous form, which got repealed or withdrawn, was unreasonable. With fracking and stuff like that, really the farmer has an opportunity to negotiate.
Do they?
Yeah.
With who? With a multi-billion-dollar Texan oil company?
Yeah. So, they do.
I mean, there's certainly cases of farmers in the Midwest and elsewhere who've said that they haven't been afforded those rights when it came to oil and gas development on their property. But you're saying in principle they should?
Well, my understanding of that particular act, that it means that if a mining company is coming onto your property, I'm going back to when I was working as a lawyer, that there's a right to negotiate with them. So there is a potential for a reasonable outcome with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess how equitable and fair that negotiation is, I guess, is probably part of the question there. I don't know the legislation myself, but
and as I say, I haven't really looked into fracking specifically.
Presumably, the same would apply with wind turbines, for example, or with renewable energy. Farmers would have the right to
don't worry,
negotiate and to get a good deal for the family farm.
Yeah, I mean, like, just because I've said that we shouldn't have a wind farm in Geograph Bay doesn't mean to say that I don't agree that there are reasonable wind farm proposals elsewhere. I mean, there's a wind farm proposal down in Collie, down through Darkin down there. Well, it's more than a proposal. But, yeah, the farmers are more than satisfied, my understanding, with what they've been offered.
Okay.
So there's you've got to get the devil's in the detail, guys. It's not about Aussie Trump just being necessarily on one side of the fence on everything. There's shades of grey in a lot of these issues.
There's nuance.
You guys are just trying to pin me down at some.
Not at all.
We're trying to explore the nuance. That's why we're here.
Trying to bring all the shades of red out of that tie you were in, Ben. Is it Labor? Is it Trump? Where are we kind of falling in the middle?
But Ben, speaking of wind farms, there was a time early last year when I actually came into your office to try to interview you at that point because I was down in Bunbury doing an investigation on the wind farms.
Yeah.
I went into your lovely office there with your big photo overlooking the roundabout. It's hard to miss.
Did you just call me Ben, by the way?
Oh, I'm sorry, Ozzy. I apologise. But you were Ben at that stage. I was thinking back to that different time when you were Ben.
Yeah. Before the golden era. Before the golden age.
At that time, you were part of One Nation.
Yeah.
So I guess firstly, what brought you to One Nation, and then tell us the story about how you came and went from One Nation.
So One Nation, I mean, I am an admirer of Pauline, and she says that we've got the guts to say what you're thinking. And from what I'm seeing, people in Freo don't really have the guts to do that. The people in Freo seem to be following down this sort of ideological path, green and trans and everything else. But that's what appeals what appeals to me with Pauline is that
she goes down a different ideological path.
Well, no, is that she's got the guts to say what the average person's thinking.
Yeah. Has she got the guts to say it in Freo though? Would she come here? Would Pauline come?
No, I'm the only one silly enough to say these things in Fremantle. But
we're not releasing this till Tuesday anyway, so don't worry. Right. You got time to beat a hasty retreat, get across the border.
But so simple as that, really. I mean, there's aspects of what Pauline has said over the years, and she's been pretty effective at calling out nonsense from the major parties. And I feel as though, I mean, I still respect Pauline. The move to One Nation was probably premature in the end, because I was offered in writing a position on the ballot paper for this coming state election, position at number 2, and then that was sort of taken away. And in fact, one of my staffers now has a position on that ballot paper, but I don't.
Why was that withdrawn? What was the reasoning they gave you?
They just, it was in the paper. Rod Caddy said I was not professional or what have you. But my you've got truth, lies, and statistics, I suppose, or whatever that saying is. But there's obviously different reasons for different people. But I know that I was wanting to talk about issues that the party leader in Western Australia was keen for me not necessarily to talk about. And
such as?
Well, at the time, keep the sheep.
Right.
Now I'm in Freo here, which but keep the sheep. I mean, in the real world out there, boys, they're out in Narrogin and Katanning and these sort of places. There's people with legitimate businesses, family generations on farms who've rely on it, and you probably don't know, because I don't know if you're.
He's a Bunbury boy.
I'm a Bunbury boy, and actually, I come from a family farm.
Well, I don't know what you like on the handpiece, shearing and stuff.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm not experienced.
If you know anything about the merino industry, like they're basically going to stop breeding merinos full stop now. So the wool clip and everything disappears as well, because the thing about live export is that gave you somewhere for the wethers to go. So if you now have nowhere for the wethers to go, so the whole industry becomes unsustainable. But anyway, because of some of the people that don't like the live sheep export trade, which those people wouldn't have been One Nation voters anyway, in my opinion.
I was going to say, surely One Nation.
So anyway, that was one of the things where I wanted to speak about it, saving that industry, and there was others in the party who didn't want me to. Mandates and vaccines I was still speaking about, because people were still coming into my office about them, and I was discouraged from speaking about those. So I feel like it was more of, again, a political party trying to clip my wings and curtail me.
So you were even more in touch with common sense than Pauline Hanson's One Nation?
Yeah.
That's quite impressive.
Quite a claim.
Yeah. And I feel like it was
you need your own web series.
I wasn't prepared to keep quiet for the party, and that's usually the reason why people leave parties, and that was the case here, I say.
I did read that they'd also been suggesting that you hadn't been working hard enough or professional enough to meet the One Nation standard. I mean, I've got to say, looking at what you're wearing on the podcast compared to the two of us, you look pretty professional.
Well, thank you. I mean, look,
You even copped to it, didn't you, at one point?
Oh, well, that's just a whole debate about basically people being judgmental, I suppose.
Right.
So the role in Parliament is you go in there and you vote on legislation and scrutinise legislation and so on and so forth. There's things that come up, particular sort of, I mean, I remember we had the Dog Act and the Cat Act, and there's things that come up that are not necessarily that sexy, and sometimes I wasn't there for those debates. Mea culpa, guilty as charged.
Not one for the
But
Protestant work
I don't
ethic.
think that's necessarily. But you invariably do that in your role in Parliament, and there's actually a convention where we can talk about it outside of Parliament, who was there then and whenever. But the convention within Parliament is that if you're not there, it's on urgent parliamentary business. You've probably heard that, which can effectively include, getting back to your electorate office and doing things in the electorate. So, the idea that you have to be there for each and every piece of legislation is just not true.
So how would you describe your work ethic then?
Pretty good, but I kind of I choose to do it a little bit differently, where I don't speak on every bill. I don't do every interview. I don't attend every town hall meeting, because I feel as though if you think that you've got interesting things to say, that's the point at which you become uninteresting to everybody. I mean, I'd rather say less, not more, and pick and choose when I do speak, because there's other people who love the sound of their own voice and get up and talk on every single bill and attend every single town hall meeting or whatever.
And yet none of them will come on last place on earth, but here you are.
My theory is that as soon as these people, and they think they're interesting to listen to, the moment you think you're interesting, and I don't know whether this is relevant to you guys, but it more or less you become uninteresting to the other person, because it's reflected in how you speak and speak down to people. So I try to speak less, not more.
Well, you've given us almost 90 minutes here, the Savo,
Okay.
I think. Anything else before we go there? We've canvassed a fair kind of cross-section of policies and the politics behind them in WA. Anything on the political front that you'll be campaigning on for the remaining 3 weeks of this campaign that we haven't touched on so far? Any kind of core commitments or promises or policies that you'll be pinning to the independent mast?
Yeah, so we've got the independent ticket, which is we've got a box above the line. We're Group M. So it's like the plain paper packaging for cigarettes. That's effectively what they've done to the independent. So we don't have any pizzazz about our position on the ticket. We've been allocated Group M.
Got to bring it yourself.
Yeah.
So we've
Got to invent a bit of pizzazz.
You found a way.
We've had to sort of look at Group M. So we're thinking, and I feel like with you sort of trendy types here, that we're sort of, it's almost like the Gruen show on ABC.
So I haven't watched it for a few years, but
so
another one. Yeah,
I'm thinking, maybe you guys have got something, but I'm thinking with M. So we're thinking in the group Empower.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a stretch, but it's pretty good. Yeah.
Empowering you. I mean, we do maintain that independent, and I've just spoken about parties, independents are the only true way of getting representation where we can speak for you directly in Parliament. So my mobile number is 0421047258. You don't get that in major parties where you can speak to them directly and they can actually listen and represent you in Parliament. So we feel that the independents offer some form of direct democracy.
So maybe it's just M with a colon and then your mobile number after it on the ballot.
Yeah. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
What about M for Mermond? Sophia's part of the ticket as well.
We've thought about that.
How do you guys get on? She's obviously coming from a slightly different position. Do you indulge?
Plenty
Do
of
you guys
policy overlap, though. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got policy overlap with regard to. We've both been passionate about very critical, you might say, about this self-ID gender legislation, and she from the point of view of people, moving into women's spaces, and I'm more about the grandmas and mums in my electorate who feel their kids have been misled into that ideology. But anyway, yeah, there's overlap there. Broadly speaking, with this independent ticket, we can talk about things like the abolishment of the regions, which in the upper house, which McGowan said 6 times he wouldn't do. They've doubled the funding to the major parties. The Labor Party will get now $6 million of your money, taxpayer money, to contest this election. It was $3 million last time, and they remain an unincorporated association, which is unprecedented that in this state that an unincorporated body would get that much taxpayer money. Usually they require them before they give them a grant to incorporate, but the Labor Party obviously doesn't impose that requirement on itself, and it gets more money than anyone, $6 million, which is outrageous. There's things about these electoral reforms, and I've spoken about them, and it's in my press release that we are campaigning on. The abolishment of the regions. We want to restore the regions. We want to keep the sheep. We want to give people in the bush back their firearms. The authoritarian nature of that is just out of control. There's you blokes again probably. I feel as though people like you guys are basically not cognizant of the way the government. You've got far too much faith in government. The firearm bill now says that firearms can be removed from farmers and whatnot, and this is outrageous. And I'm appealing to your intellectual side, but it actually says they can remove your firearm if the police commissioner doesn't like your views and opinions and your way of living. Now, how could that terminology find its way into an act in this state where it impinges on people's...
Well, didn't they have to give half of them back anyway? They moved too early, right? And it was found that the constitutionality of it wasn't all sewn up when they confiscated the firearms in the first place. It was a whole thing where the cops had to start dishing them back out again a few months back.
I haven't heard that. I certainly haven't heard anyone complaining about getting guns back. I've heard them complaining about them getting taken away. But this is the thin end of the wedge sort of stuff. So if you give the police commissioner power to take a law-abiding person's firearms away from them because the police commissioner decides he doesn't like your way of living and your views and opinions, then you better not get on Facebook and get into any kind of an argument with someone or whatever, because you're going to get your firearms taken off you because the police commissioner's watching, and they do watch police, social media. I mean, you're just opening the floodgates to a lot of unfairness, and it's basically another way in which they're impacting on freedom of speech and just eroding rights. I know we don't have a right to bear arms, but you've got a right to apply for one and keep one. And if you're going to take them off people for stupid things like that, then you're eroding rights. And this is how this leftist government works: is eventually they're eroding rights, and that's what we, as the independent ticket, are looking to push back against. The other thing that starts with M is make Australia great again.
There's a new one.
There you
Wow,
go.
what a twist on a classic. What do you think?
You wouldn't even have to print your own hats. You'd be able to...
No, I've already bought. I've ordered a few of them off
What
the
colour?
internet.
We're talking dark
red.
MAGA or red?
Red.
Classic MAGA. Throw them back a few years.
But I was thinking about doing the black and white.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're just, because of these electoral changes, we've only just registered our ticket.
Right.
So we're 6 months behind the parties.
and you only got a few weeks, so you better wriggle on.
So it's pretty exhausting, really, when you think about how, fundraising, everything. I mean, we've been obliterated. So I don't know whether you guys have any interest in independence in Parliament. I mean, I'm not talking about Teals. I know you probably support Teals, but I feel as though I've sold a bit of a lemon on the phone, because you said that you were really wanting to hold particularly interested in government overreach and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we are. Yeah.
That's all we talked about.
Yeah.
We spent like 2 hours talking about it.
No, but there's been a lot of implications of sort of more of a green ideology and Fremantle ideology in this podcast. That's my feeling.
Look, I think, you know what I think? I think we live in a new world where the old rules of left and right don't really apply. It's the authority, it's the establishment versus the anti-establishment, and there's all kind of strange and interesting coalitions and alliances that can be built.
That is the smartest thing you've said all day.
Thank you. Thank you, Aussie. I appreciate it.
Let's
I've just got one more question for you.
Yeah.
Are we going to see an Aussie Trump crypto coin at any point?
Well, look, it's very hard to get elected as an independent. I'm third on the independent ticket, and the independent ticket is on the right-hand side of the ballot paper on the upper house. Ticket M, make Australia great again, make Australia healthy again. But because of those challenges, it may be that dare I say it, I don't get elected.
Yeah.
Re-elected. And if you want to teach me how to set up a cryptocurrency and use my name change to that effect.
You'll be looking for new opportunities.
I might need new opportunities.
Is that podcasting?
No, I mean,
No future in it?
well, I feel as though the legacy media has a lot of issues. We need to do something a bit more edgy, and maybe you guys can play a role in that.
Let's find out.
Yeah, we'll do our best. Thank you very much, Aussie. Thanks for joining us at The Last Place on Earth.
No worries.